This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Kelly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Top African leaders arrive in Beijing for a three-day summit, which China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi says will write a new chapter of unity and cooperation for the global south. Now, this former Philippine mayor is expected to return to Manila by Friday following her arrest in Indonesia for alleged links to Chinese crime syndicates and money laundering. Meanwhile, a former aide to the New York governor has been arrested and charged with acting as a Chinese agent in exchange for millions of dollars. Plus, semiconductor-related stocks in Asia get a smackdown on renewed U.S. recession fears. Medical emergencies in Hong Kong can get tricky, especially for residents of its outlying islands. CNA's Deborah Wong joins the city's government flying service on their rescue missions, where every minute counts. Chinese President Xi Jinping will host more than 24 African leaders at a welcome dinner banquet today, where delegates from more than 50 countries are in Beijing for the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. While Mr. Xi is expected to urge African leaders to absorb more Chinese goods in exchange for pledges of loans and investment. Beijing says the three-day gathering is the biggest diplomatic event it has held in recent years. And Mr. Xi has already started holding bilateral events with delegates. He's witnessed the signing of a railway project with Tanzania and Zambia, praising the opportunity to improve the transport network in East Africa. Mr. Xi is also expected to give a keynote speech at the opening ceremony tomorrow. State media say he will announce new measures for cooperation with the continent and details on building a high-level community between China and Africa. Well, African leaders will be looking for new loans to tackle a growing debt crisis in the continent. Others want to clarify plans for some unfulfilled pledges from past summits. CNA's Daniel Kijo has more.
Tanzania's President Samia Suluhu Hassan will be one of the many leaders representing the African continent at the FOCAC summit in China. At the summit, she's expected to speak on behalf of the East Africa region in the hopes of growing ties with China, a country she terms a close friend. There, the Tanzanian leader, along with her Zambian counterpart Hakainde Hichilema, signed a deal with China to improve the 1,860-kilometer-long Tanzania-Zambia railway Tazara, built in the 70s with Chinese assistance. The railway is seen by many as a symbol of a decades-long cooperation between China and Africa in socio-economic spheres. A prime example of this cooperation is China's Belt and Road Initiative, which has seen increased funding and execution of several large infrastructure projects in Africa, geared at expanding trade with the continent. Not just Tanzania and Zambia. Other African nations are also expected to pursue multi-million-dollar agreements with China this week, with some such as Kenya focused on trade and infrastructure. Others could be eyeing opportunities to boost training and industrial growth. Economic ties between the African continent and China have grown rapidly over the last decade, with the Asian giant becoming the largest trading partner. The International Monetary Fund notes that 16% of Africa's imports now come from China, mainly manufactured goods and machinery, with 20% of the region's export, mostly metals, minerals and fuel, heading to China. But analysts say amongst attendees in Beijing, there are some concerns, one of which is how China plans to meet its as yet unfulfilled pledge to buy $300 billion worth of African goods made during the previous 2021 summit. Another issue leaders might seek to raise is the desire for more favorable loans. Critics say that some infrastructure that has been built with Chinese backing is not well matched to the needs of the recipient countries and in some cases has plunged them into debt. Analysts argue that as China seeks to cement its position as a global economic powerhouse, the FOCAC summit will be crucial in forging an organic growth to its relationship with Africa that will result in a win-win for both parties. Daniel Kijo, CNA, Dar es Salaam.
And for more, CNA's Lauren Ong. She joins us live from the FOCAC Media Center in Beijing. Lauren, so what else can we expect from this summit? What should we be looking out for?
Well, this forum is one of the highest platforms for cooperation between Africa and China, a trilateral summit that alternates between China and an African nation as hosts. And over here at the Media Center is getting increasingly busy here in Beijing as the summit gets underway. And to get a sense of what we can expect, we can take cues from this year's theme, which puts advanced development front and center. And traditionally, as you've heard from the package, we can expect agreements on trade as well as infrastructure. But industry observers will have a keen eye on sustainable development and how it rides off the back of commitments laid out in a 2021 edition in Dhaka. And if you were to take cues from the headlines that have been coming up leading up to this summit, as well as this local paper, which is on offer here at the Media Center, you will see commitments in green transition, as well as investments in clean energy and minerals as China's President Xi Jinping meets African leaders one-on-one. And this is very much in line with the Belt and Road Initiative Forum announcements last year, which Africa is a big part of, with green energy increasingly at the center. But as one analyst points out, the attention will be in the details, like, for instance, exactly what type of energy the focus is on. Let's have a listen.
Those critical minerals such as lithium will be essential to the production of, for example, batteries or electric vehicles. So is China going to continue to focus on this mining aspect of the green technology? Or China, according to some speculation, will see Africa as a new growing market for China's green products? I think that's a great aspiration, but it also raises a question as to whether the question of affordability, whether Africa at this stage can afford the green technology products that China has to offer.
Well, renewed pledges for African imports will also be on the radar. And if you remember, China committed to increase African imports to 300 billion by 2024, a target which has not been met and has modest progress, largely due to China's economic slowdown as well as barriers producers have faced in Africa to sort of go past China's strict import laws. Otelli.
Lauren, we know that this summit is taking place amid all that pressure from the West in areas like tech or sustainable energy development. So this, and you mentioned that there's economic slowdown in China. Therefore, we can assume that this summit for China is very significant?
Yes, for sure. And unlike all these increasing pressure from the EU and US, analysts say it's limiting China's growth capabilities, encouraging it to turn to the global south, which offers untapped opportunities in stark contrast. And in areas like green energy as well as tech, the sectors that are come increasingly under pressure and the very sectors that African countries are looking to grow with. So interests are very much in line. But as one analyst points out, there are still key considerations to consider. Let's have a listen.
So I think from China's position, this year's FOCAC is a demonstration of China's commitment to Africa's growth and to Africa's future. I think since COVID, there have been a lot of questions asked about where African revenue generation or Africa's economic growth will be coming from. I think the FOCAC this year will have to focus on that question. Where is the future of Africa's economic development, and what role does China plan to play in it?
Well, indeed, these financial commitments have been increasingly a key topic that have come up of these summits, especially with criticisms that China is bringing large debts to these countries with its large commitments to the receiving countries. But China has clapped back, saying that it is not actually doing so and that it's a false narrative hyped up by the Western world. And indeed, we've seen just yesterday, Chinese officials encouraging both China and Africa to counter what it calls surging hegemonism as well as Cold War mentality. And this is also comes on the back of a broader campaign to position China as sort of a leader of the global south, of the developing countries, as a way to challenge the Western-led order. And indeed, many of these commitments have been sort of packaged package as a sort of alternative to the Western-style form of development, their kind of modernization. And with 54 votes in the UN, Africa is an increasingly important continent for China to engage with. So this summit is one of the oldest and most crucial ways to do so.
Many thanks for that report. Lauren Ong there speaking to us in Beijing. Indonesia says it will deport a fugitive former mayor from the Philippines who's accused of links to Chinese criminal syndicates. Alice Guo is wanted by the Philippine Senate for refusing to attend a congressional probe on her alleged criminal ties. She has denied accusations which include fraud, money laundering and human trafficking. Authorities have frozen dozens of bank accounts and other assets linked to her. A probe began in May after authorities raided a casino in the town of Bamban, uncovering alleged scams on a facility built on land that's owned by Guo. Well, she fled the Philippines in July, traveling to Malaysia and Singapore prior to her arrest. And for more, CNA's Buena Bernal. She joins us now from Metro Manila. So, Buena, we are getting reports that Alice Guo is supposed to return to the Philippines by Friday. Can you confirm that?
Various Philippine authorities indeed estimating the return of this embattled controversial personality, Alice Guo, within the week after her arrest at around 1:30 a.m. Wednesday. And Guo, as we know, is linked to these crime-ridden online casinos locally known as Philippine Offshore Gaming Operators, or POGOs, with suspicions of Chinese influence operations also surfacing after she was able to secure a local mayoral post despite her Filipino identity under question, with her reportedly being able to secure civil registry documents at a birth certificate mill in southern Philippines now under investigation. Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has thanked Indonesia for the cooperation that made this arrest possible after he had ordered a ban on POGOs last July.
The Philippines also thanks the Indonesian government for their assistance on this matter. The close cooperation between our two governments has made this arrest possible. Let this serve as a warning to those who attempt to evade justice. Such is an exercise in futility. The arm of the law is long, and it will reach you.
The Philippine National Police says it cooperated with Indonesian police given a 2017 deal between these two forces on transnational crimes and intelligence sharing. Now, there's also an extradition treaty between the Philippines and Indonesia, but legal experts I spoke to say that that treaty actually only applies to personalities with a court conviction or with a court-ordered arrest warrant. And remember that Guo has neither, because the charges against her are still at the prosecutorial level or at the Justice Department. That includes qualified trafficking, money laundering as well. And that extradition treaty, therefore, might not be applicable to her. And it was actually the Philippine Senate, not a judicial body, that ordered her arrest after her non-appearance in legislative hearings. So I spoke to a Filipino legal expert to explain what possible legal framework was applied here given this limitation.
This is not really yet the criminal procedure that we're talking of because no charge has been filed yet, right? But we know that the passports have been canceled. And if you have no valid passport, you're in a foreign state, you can be deported. It's actually, I think, a simple process of deportation for lack of a valid passport for them.
So, Buena, what can we expect moving forward? It does sound like quite a complicated case.
If Philippine authorities are to be believed, that Alice Go is returning this week, then custody for her will be transferred to the Sergeant-at-Arms at the Philippine Senate that ordered her arrest. Now, there are also Indonesian media reports saying that there is possible negotiations for a fugitive exchange. So if that is the track, then that is purely a diplomatic track, negotiations between these two countries. The hope from legal experts is for these preliminary investigations at the Justice Department to be fast-tracked. The prescribed period for that under Philippine rules is actually 60 to 90 days, but courts in the Philippines have been clogged, and even prosecutions in the Philippines have also been clogged, resulting to delays. We also know that Thursday is the continuation of the Philippine Senate's hearing on the escape of Go, and President Marcos has actually vowed that heads will roll in terms of those who aided in Go's escape last July.
All right, many thanks, Buena Banal, live from Metro Manila on Alice Go's investigation. Well, U.S. prosecutors have accused a former top aide to the New York governor of being an undercover agent for China. Well, Linda's son allegedly worked to advance Beijing's interests in exchange for millions of dollars in kickbacks and perks, including special deliveries of salted duck. Well, she and her husband allegedly used the money to buy multi-million-dollar homes in New York and Hawaii and a Ferrari. Mitch McCann files this report.
Linda Sun held a number of jobs within the New York state government for over a decade, most recently as Governor Kathy Hochul's Deputy Chief of Staff and then a senior role in the New York Department of Labor. In the indictment filed by prosecutors in Brooklyn, Linda Sun is charged with violating and conspiring to violate the Foreign Agents Registrations Act, visa fraud, alien smuggling and money laundering conspiracy. Among her alleged crimes, prosecutors say she blocked Taiwanese officials from having access to high-level representatives in New York. Sun is also accused of securing unauthorized invitation letters from the office of the governor, which Chinese representatives then used to obtain visas into the United States. In exchange for her work, it's alleged the business of Sun's husband, who has also been indicted, received millions of dollars in payments. In a statement, Kathy Hochul's office says Linda Sun was fired in March of last year when misconduct was discovered, and says it then reported her to authorities and has assisted them ever since. The couple pleaded not guilty and were released under the instructions not to contact the Chinese consulate. They will reappear later this month. Mitch McCann, CNA, New York.
Well, time now for a short break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, South Korea proposes ways to reform its pension fund. To assuage concerns, it may run out in about 30 years. Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia Tonight. You are just in time for business news with Roland Lim. And Roland, the overnight plunge in Nvidia's share price is actually rippling through Asia, isn't it?
I'm afraid so. Steep losses for Asia-related stocks here in East Asia, as renewed U.S. recession fears reignited jitters that the AI-led rally may be running out of steam. Now, starting with NVIDIA suppliers, take a look on the board. The biggest percentage loser is in Japan, Tokyo Electron down by 8.55%. Chip equipment maker Advantest down by more than 7.7%. And Taiwan's most valuable company, that's TSMC, is down 5.43%. And rival SK Hynix down by 8%. The tech sell-off dragging Asian equities lower. Nikkei 225 dived more than 4%, weighed down by falls on Wall Street and a higher yen against the dollar. Meantime, in Seoul, the Kospi 3.15% lower, its biggest one-day loss since August. And the Taiwan-weighted index tanking 4.5%, dragged down by losses in TSMC, which makes up about 9% of the gauge. Now, the losses came after global AI darling NVIDIA was sold heavily, suffering its biggest one-day loss in market capitalization. Now, that's as investors rein in their optimism about artificial intelligence amid fears of a cooling U.S. economy. The concerns deepened after the U.S. Department of Justice reportedly issued NVIDIA with an antitrust subpoena. Now, shares plunged nearly 10% to $108 apiece, shaving off some $280 million of NVIDIA's value to $2.65 trillion now, the counter continuing to fall in pre-market open. According to a Bloomberg report, the DOJ sent a subpoena to NVIDIA and other companies. It's seeking more information on whether the dominant AI chip manufacturer had violated antitrust laws. NVIDIA has been the market leader in AI data center chips, and the watchdog has been concerned that the chipmaker is making it harder for buyers to switch to other suppliers. But NVIDIA insists its market leadership is based on merit. Volatile trade continues for flag carrier Cathay Pacific, which ends the day in the red again. This despite its announcement it would fully resume operations of its Airbus A350 fleet by Saturday. The airline has scrapped a number of flights following the discovery of an engine fault on a Zurich-bound flight on Monday. Now, Cathay isn't alone in cancelling its A350 flights. Air China, too, has scrapped 4 domestic flights operated on the A350, while Japan Airlines says it would check part of its fleet. It's a similar story for Singapore Airlines, which will also be checking its A350 fleet. Shares of the Chinese airline down more than 1% in Hong Kong. Japan Airlines ending more than 1.5% lower. Singapore Airlines also in the red by almost 1%. China's summer school holidays are over, and the traveller numbers for the season are out, with increases all around. CNA's Tan Yu-Guan has the details.
It's a summer for travel. From July to August, China's immigration authorities recorded an average of nearly 1.8 million entries and exits a day, 110 million in total over 2 months, a 30% jump from the same period the year before. Thanks to mutual visa-free agreements to over 20 countries, Chinese mainlanders form half of the flood of travelers, about 55 million. While travelers from Taiwan, Hong Kong, Macau account for the bulk of the rest, 44 million. Just under 1/10 of the total numbers, under 11 million, are foreigners. Still, that represents a 53% increase over the same period last year, thanks in part to the various unilateral visa-free travel arrangements that China rolled out earlier this year, including 6-day transit visa for travelers from over 50 countries and 15-day visa-free travel for at least a dozen other countries.
Our company data indicates that we have surged 88% for July and August comparing with the last year, and mostly driven by UK, France, Germany, and the USA.
Local governments have also been rolling out other measures to make China more foreigner-friendly. In June, Shanghai set up a one-stop center at Pudong Airport geared at helping foreigners navigate the country, including how to make payment in cashless China.
服务中心目前它是有4个模块，一个的话是支付、文旅、交通、通讯，分为4个模块。我们每天的咨询量的话是500人左右。
I did not come prepared for my business trip. Today I got help from the staff to help me get an eSIM card for my phone.
The center is in part a result of feedback from a group of foreign volunteers or international experience officers that Shanghai put together to help make the city more foreigner-friendly.
The city has done a really proactive job of asking us for what are the friction points that we're experiencing.
We have the right to also make proposals to International Services Shanghai.
Shanghai faced an exodus of foreigners after COVID shutdowns 2 years ago. And that has had a chilling effect on businesses catering to expats. 2 years on, some scars remain. Tan Yu-Guan, CNA, Shanghai.
More market action for you. Chinese stocks trending lower, much like the rest of East Asia. The Hang Seng Index slipping to a 2-week low. Oil producers led the losers after crude prices dropping to $69 a barrel. The Shanghai Composite is currently down 0.67 for the day. Shenzhen, the second bourse, is down 0.5%. Signs are emerging that the services sector is slowing. The Caixin Services PMI, which looks at activity in the smaller private sector firms, slid to 51.6 in August from 52.1 in July. Remember, the 50 mark separates expansion from contraction on a monthly basis. Now, while new businesses continue to expand, the rate of growth has eased. The South Korean government has unveiled a major reform to protect its $855 billion public pension fund from depletion as the country grapples with a rapidly aging population. The proposal includes measures to delay the depletion of the world's third biggest pension fund, which is expected to run out by 2056. Now, these include raising the pension contribution rate to 13% of income from 9% currently, the first time since 1998. Now, despite higher contributions, pension payouts will remain stable at 42% of income, avoiding a previously planned cut to 40%. The government also plans to boost overseas and alternative investments to extend the fund's life to 2072. Pressure on South Korea's pension system is mounting as its population shrinks. More than 80% of young South Koreans fear they won't receive pensions after the fund runs out. To address concerns, the government is pushing for a legal amendment to ensure pensions are guaranteed by law. The reform is expected to take effect by 2026. And that's all the business news I have for you. Natalie.
Thanks very much for that, Roland. The time now for another short break, but coming up on East Asia tonight. A lifeline for residents in Hong Kong's outlying islands. But the city's air ambulance service is facing new challenges. Our correspondent has been following the crew and joins us after the break. And the first summit of the leaders of New Zealand and South Korea in 9 years sees a common voice condemning North Korea's nuclear development. You're watching East Asia tonight. Top African leaders arrive in Beijing ahead of a 3-day summit, which China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi has said will write a new chapter of unity and cooperation for the Global South. A former Philippine mayor is expected to return to Manila by Friday following her arrest in Indonesia for alleged links to Chinese crime syndicates and money laundering. And a former aide to the New York governor has been arrested and charged with acting as a Chinese agent in exchange for millions of dollars and perks, including deliveries of salted duck. In the next 25 years, more than 1 in 3 Hong Kong residents will be above the age of 65. And while the urban population can count on medical resources within the city, it's harder for residents on outlying islands. As the demand for geriatric services increases, Deborah Wong finds out what it takes to attend to them.
Cheongzhou is a 40-minute ferry ride away from the city. On weekends, the normally quiet streets are packed with tourists. But look closer and you see that it's an economy run mostly by older residents. These islanders may be hardy, but as they get older,
腳而家老咗就膝頭哥咧退化啦，緊有嘅。我以前都行山啊，拉尾越行越痛。
來回咧1個鐘咯，即係好遠㗎。我哋住嗰度140幾級樓梯，140幾級樓梯嗰度咪跣親咯，整親咯，哇幾驚啊，幾驚行唔翻嘅。
There are more than 195,000 people living on outlying islands in Hong Kong. As of 2023, over 15% are above the age of 65. St. John's Hospital on the island provides emergency services. Residents with mobility issues can also tap on medication delivery and telehealth services. But for more complex cases, they need to call in the big guns. The Government Flying Service, or GFS, handles search and rescue operations and medical emergencies. They're often activated to evacuate island residents to the city for treatment. Aside from the air crewmen who are medically trained, the GFS also has 67 healthcare volunteers on the roster.
We only have a few minutes on ground to think about the case and to be prepared for it. Because since we are airborne, there's no more access to equipment. It's unlike the hospital setting, where you can easily ask for help. The information that you get, we usually get only like 1 or 2 sentences, very brief description of what's going on with the patient. We don't have access to the medical record that we normally do in the hospital setting.
When the siren goes off, the clock starts ticking down. And the team sometimes must make a snap decision, like whether to pack controlled drugs that may be temperature sensitive. We spent a few days with GFS to see what it takes to respond to these calls.
We're flying across the Victoria Harbour right now, and we're moments away from landing in Cheongzhou. The case we're on is categorized B, which which means the crew has 2 hours to complete the mission. If it's categorized as A, which means a little bit more critical, the crew only has about 20 minutes to finish the mission. It is pretty straightforward, but the crew still has to be laser focused because the weather can change any moment, especially during summer months.
In fact, before we took off on one of the flights, there was a sudden downpour. The pilot had to wait for rain clouds to clear before plotting the quickest route. Once the craft lands, the crew has a quick word with the doctor, and the transfer is done within minutes.
Especially in cold day or in extreme hot weather, you can expect a more senior person will have call outs because of their breathing or heart problem. So in our in-house training, we will focus on geriatric the care. They have different pathophysiology from normal adults.
A citywide labour shortage in the healthcare sector is expected to pile on the pressure, and it shows no signs of easing. Hong Kong most recently stepped up recruitment of health workers in the mainland and Malaysia, among other places. It's also considering expanding the scheme to non-locally trained allied health workers like radiographers and occupational therapists.
And for more, CNA's Deborah Wong joins us now from Hong Kong. Well, Deborah, you literally got a bird's eye view of what aging can be like on the islands. But I'm wondering, do all the islands get similar resources?
Well, I'll tell you, the short answer is no, because population size matters here. Now, Hong Kong has more than 250 outlying islands, but most tourists are probably only acquainted with 4 of the bigger ones, Lantau, Lama, Cheong Zhao, as well as Ping Zhao. So these bigger islands, they have a resident population of at least 6,000 people. We are looking at village houses. They also have medical outposts. At least 2 of them have hospitals, and there are also quite frequent ferry services to these islands. And then you have the rest of the islands. Majority of them are uninhabited, but you still get a handful of residents living there, like in Im Tin Zai or even Po Doi To, which is the southernmost end of Hong Kong. And many of the residents, there used to be residents living there like in the thousands, but many of them over the last decades, they have moved to the city for work. And so the demand for amenities, it's very low, and because of that, there's no medical outposts on these islands. There are also fewer ferry services there. So what happens in an emergency situation is that the government flying service, they get called in, but there is no helipad, so they end up airlifting stretchers into the helicopter and then sending residents to hospitals in the city.
And Deborah, speaking of the government flying service, what was it like when you were following them on their missions? I imagine there is this great sense of urgency, when you get the SOS call.
Yeah, there is a great sense of urgency when the call comes in, but just to give you a little bit of background, we spent 3 whole days of them. First 2 days, there was a lot of waiting around because there were only 2 cases that were picked up by the base that we're in. And of these 2 cases, one of them came from an island that was restricted, so we were not allowed to tag along with the crew. So we did spend a lot of time the first 2 days on base, chatting with them, and we found out that the team is very diverse. There are former nurses on the team, former policemen, firemen, and even engineers. And on weekends, the team is joined by at least 1 or 2 volunteer healthcare workers, doctors or nurses who during the weekdays, they are working in emergency departments. So this is a team that is very well used to high intense situations, high pressure situations. So we ended up waiting for a flight for 2 days. And at one point, the team even joked that our CNA team brought blessings to the islanders because there were no emergency call-outs that weekend. But there were 15 call-outs the previous weekend. And I think that goes to show how unpredictable the nature of the job is. When the calls finally came in, we saw how quickly the team kicked into mission mode. They had a very short briefing. They were discussing the weather report, the kind of what the case entailed, what kind of supplies to bring. And, you heard in the story earlier that the team also needs to think about the contingencies, what kind of medication they need to pack if a patient deteriorates in the air. So they got to make a decision very quickly. Thankfully, the cases we saw while in the helicopter, they were stable, non-life-threatening. But at the same time, as an observer, it was pretty interesting. But as a patient, it can be disorienting. So there was always a crew member attached to the patient,
checking the vital signs, making sure that they are assured, making sure that they're okay. So it was quite a memorable experience for our team at the Hong Kong Bureau.
Yeah, it's really interesting that this team is made up of a diverse group of people, and they're cohesive together. But at the same time, also, Deborah, you talked about this labour shortage in the healthcare sector, right? So, what exactly is the city doing about it aside from recruiting foreign talent?
Well, Hong Kong is now shifting its focus to primary health care, and that means identifying and preventing chronic illnesses early, as well as strengthening community-based care. Essentially, it hopes to reduce that pressure that we're seeing at hospitals and at emergency departments. So the attention has now turned to community groups that help seniors age in place. And we interviewed one of these organizations called Silver Moth Charity. They have an outfit that's based in Peng Tsao, one of the islands that we are featuring in the news. They engage allied health workers on a part-time basis. So we're looking at physiotherapists, occupational therapists to help seniors with their mobility. And at the same time, we're also seeing more elder care centres reach out to volunteers of varying ages to run activities for seniors or even conduct home visits. So these day-to-day services are as important. Acute emergency care is important as well. But at the same time, growing this community network on the ground does go some way to ease the pressure that we're seeing in the hospitals.
Yeah, I'm going to foresee that demand for these services will only increase as Hong Kong's population ages. Well, thank you so very much, Deborah Wong. Wonderful story there. And Deborah Wong there speaking to us live in Hong Kong. And for more on elderly living in Hong Kong's outlying islands, you can catch CNA correspondent Island Healthcare Needs. It premieres tonight at 9:30 Singapore Hong Kong time. And you can also watch it whenever and wherever you like on CNA.Asia or on YouTube. South Korea and New Zealand have condemned North Korea's nuclear weapons program and its military cooperation with Russia. Well, New Zealand leader Christopher Luxon is on a 2-day trip to Seoul. The first time in 9 years, a New Zealand Prime Minister is visiting South Korea. He met President Yoon Suk-yeol, and in a joint statement, the two leaders condemned in, quote, the strongest possible terms, North Korea's growing military ties with Russia and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. While they also stressed the importance of peace in the Taiwan Strait. Business was also on the agenda. Two-way trade volume between the two countries has more than doubled in 10 years.
More than 70 years ago, New Zealanders came here to fight for a free Korea, and our personnel are still here today supporting peace on the Korean peninsula.
러브 군사 협력, 우크라이나 전쟁 등 전체주의, 권위주의 세력의 도전이 지속되는 엄중한 상황에서 한국과 뉴질랜드를 포함한 가치 공유국들 간의 연대는 그 어느 때보다 중요합니다.
The top U.S. diplomat to Taiwan says that Washington is not ruling out the possibility of co-producing weapons with the island. Raymond Green, the newly appointed director of the American Institute in Taiwan and the de facto U.S. ambassador, made the remark at a press conference in Taipei, and it is his first since he took the post in July this year. Mr. Green says his country will continue its arms sales to Taiwan, especially when the island is facing a growing military threat from China. He says under the Biden administration, Washington has sold weapons worth $6.4 billion to the island. But due to the ongoing pressures the U.S. faces in producing military hardware, Washington is currently working with different countries to try to boost its supply.
As we're meeting or facing multiple demands, there has to be a prioritization process. And one thing I can say very clearly is Taiwan's defense needs is the very top of our priority list.
Poland's foreign minister says he hopes China can help find a solution to the war in Ukraine. Radoslaw Sierkowski spoke to CNA's Lok Wei-Su during his visit to Asia, and he outlined the global consequences of the grinding conflict against the backdrop of the ever-closer ties between Beijing and Moscow and the ongoing Sino-US rivalry.
In Europe, we watch the rivalry between China and the United States with some apprehension. China is a partner and a competitor at the same time, and we want that rivalry to be conducted at the right temperature without boiling over.
No less than the U.S. National Security Advisor has come out very recently to say, without Chinese support, certainly economically, Russia would not have the resources with which to pursue its actions in Ukraine.
We respect China. It's a quarter of humanity. And we recognize that China is honoring the thickest of our red lines and not supplying Russia with actual military equipment. But yes, it has supplanted European companies in Russia, and it's supplying Russia with many dual-use goods. And we monitor to what extent the sanctions that have been imposed, financial and others, are being respected. We also would encourage China to persuade Vladimir Putin to end this war. China would get itself a lot of goodwill and a lot of gratitude in Europe if it told Vladimir Putin enough is enough. Russia needs to come back to within the fold of international law.
A final question, Minister. Now, you yourself are a student of realpolitik. To encourage another country that has the wherewithal to not listen to that encouragement, short of doing more than just encourage, can Europe do any more to, I suppose, encourage China to perhaps not lend that support to Russia that you have seen so far, and that is vital to keeping alive that conflict in Ukraine? Final question.
Well, China 10, 15 years ago had a lot of soft power in Europe and also around the world. But perceptions of China have now declined. And we do notice that Chinese state media popularize Russian narratives on this colonial war. I think trade with Europe is as important to the Chinese economy and the well-being of its citizens as it is for us, or maybe even more. So we need an important country like Russia to stop trying to rebuild the Russian empire. And we need China, which after all was a victim of European colonialism, to tell Russia that the time of European colonial empires is over.
Next on East Asia Tonight. The Pope calls for more inter-religious dialogue to counter extremism as his tour of Asia gets into full swing in Muslim-majority Indonesia. Pope Francis says the Vatican will increase inter-religious dialogue in efforts to counter extremism and intolerance. The pontiff delivered the first address of his Asia-Pacific tour in Indonesia's Istana Merdeka, with President Joko Widodo, government officials and members of the diplomatic community in attendance. CNA's Leong Wai-kit has this report.
A ceremonious welcome for Pope Francis at Indonesia's presidential palace. The pontiff was greeted by a guard of honor, young Indonesians, and the country's top leadership. The Pope's theme in the Indonesian leg of his visit is faith, fraternity and compassion, a theme he linked to the country's laws and motto, which promote unity in diversity and social justice. Both, he says, are balanced and wise philosophies in fostering peace and battling religious extremism in Indonesia. In his first speech of his 11-day Asia-Pacific tour, Pope Francis also vowed to increase interreligious dialogue.
Si potranno eliminare in questo modo I pregiudizi e far crescere un clima di rispetto e di fiducia reciproca, indispensabile per affrontare le sfide comuni, tra quelli quella del contrastare l'estremismo e anche la intolleranza, no?
President Joko Widodo echoed the vital need for interfaith talks given the growing number of conflicts and wars around the world.
Semangat perdamaian dan toleransi inilah yang ingin Indonesia bersama Vatikan sebarkan, apalagi di tengah dunia yang semakin bergejolak. Seperti yang kita ketahui bersama, konflik dan perang terjadi di berbagai belahan dunia, termasuk di Palestina, yang telah menelan lebih dari 40.000 korban jiwa. Indonesia mengapresiasi, sangat menghargai sikap Vatikan yang terus menyuarakan, menyerukan perdamaian di Palestina dan mendukung two-state solution.
Pope Francis also extended his greetings to President-elect Prabowo Subianto, wishing him a fruitful period of service to Indonesia. While in Jakarta, the Pope is also set to visit the Istiqlal Mosque, which is seen as a national symbol for religious harmony. The mosque sits opposite a Catholic church, which is linked via a tunnel known as the Tunnel of Friendship. Leong Wakit, CNA, Jakarta.
Bangladesh says that around 8,000 Rohingya Muslims have entered the country in the past few months to escape the recent rise in violence in Myanmar's western Rakhine state. Well, the ongoing crisis is putting a strain on the Bangladeshi government to accommodate the large influx of refugees. Bangladesh's de facto foreign minister says the government is planning to hold a serious discussion at the cabinet in the next few days to address the situation. He added that the country is no longer able to provide humanitarian shelter to additional refugees. The minister also stressed that Bangladesh will be stepping up measures to prevent further infiltration. Thousands of Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh gathered just last month to mark 7 years since a military crackdown forced them to flee. The recent uptick in violence is the worst that the minority group has faced since a 2017 military-led campaign forced more than 730,000 people to leave Myanmar's Rakhine state. It's the time of the hour now where we have your Paralympics update. And in the women's discus throw, F41 world and Paralympic record holder Rawa Tili won gold with 36.55 meters, although no records were broken today. Well, F41 is a classification for athletes of short stature. A highly decorated athlete, the Tunisian has been competing since the 2008 Paralympics. Morocco's Yusra Karim won silver, and Ecuador's Estefany Lopez won bronze. In men's shot put, F46 Paralympic record holder Greg Stewart won gold with 16.38 meters, although he didn't break any records this time as well. The F46 classification means that the upper limbs of the athlete are affected by deficiency. Stewart was born missing part of his left hand, and he told a reporter that the only message he wants to spread in Paris is, quote, "Be you." A British Columbia native is sharing the podium with India's Sachin Sarjero Kilari, who won silver, and Croatia's Luka Bekovic, who won bronze. A medal action across a wide range of paracycling categories today. Britain's Sarah Story won the women's C5 individual time trial paracycling with 20 minutes, 22.15 seconds. Now this is her mammoth 13th gold medal in paracycling. And silver went to Heidi Gauguin of France, and Australia's Alana Foster won bronze. The C5 race is for athletes with the lowest level of impairment of any of the cycling classes at the Paralympics. At one level up, C4, USA's Samantha Bosco won gold with a time of 21 minutes, 39.24 seconds, followed by Australia's Mag Lemon and Switzerland's Franziska Mathilde Dorridge. And looks like China remains rather at the top of the medal tally with 54 gold medals. A wide gap between China and second-placed Britain. The team from London has 31 gold medals, and the US is trailing in third place with 23 gold. And that wraps up Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can always look us up on Facebook, YouTube, and on X. Well, thanks for your company this evening.